Hi, I'm Emma Rodriguez, and 3 nights ago, my brother Marcus stood in my tiny Logan Square studio apartment, laughed at my secondhand furniture, and told his girlfriend Lisa that I was still playing house in poverty. He had no idea that the gleaming Harrison Tower he'd been desperately trying to get approved for a lease in for the past 6 months belonged to me. He didn't know that Rivera Development Group, the company he'd been badmouthing to our family as some faceless corporation destroying Chicago's character, was mine. So when he smirked and said, "Emma, when are you going to stop embarrassing our family with this pathetic lifestyle?" I smiled, pulled out my phone, and made one simple call to building management. The smugness disappeared from his face pretty quickly after that. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind rattled the windows of my studio apartment as I adjusted the collar of my simple black dress, the kind you find at Target, but somehow still makes you feel put together when you need it most. Tonight was Marcus's engagement party, and I knew exactly what to expect. The venue would be expensive, the crowd would be flashy, and my brother would find every opportunity to remind everyone that Emma Rodriguez, his younger sister, was still the family disappointment living in her cramped apartment, while he soared through life in his River North penthouse. I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror as I applied a light coat of lipstick. 28 years old, shoulder-length dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a dress that cost $30 but looked decent enough for a rooftop party in downtown Chicago. Nothing about my appearance screamed success, and that was exactly how I preferred it. In my line of work, anonymity was an asset, not a liability. While Marcus spent his days creating flashy marketing campaigns and posting every meal on Instagram, I had been quietly building something that would outlast every social media trend he chased. My phone buzzed with a text from our mother, Sarah. "Mija, please try to be happy for your brother tonight. I know you two have your differences, but family comes first." I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Of course, Mom. I'll be there." What she didn't understand was that I had never been anything but supportive of Marcus. The tension between us came entirely from his need to position himself as the successful Rodriguez sibling, which apparently required painting me as the struggling artist type who couldn't get her life together. The truth was more complicated than either of them realized. 5 years ago, when Marcus had graduated from Northwestern with his business degree and immediately landed a job at Apex Creative Solutions, I had been finishing my master's in urban planning at UIC. While he celebrated his starting salary of $60,000 with expensive dinners and a leased BMW, I was living off ramen noodles and student loans, working on a thesis about sustainable urban development that would eventually become the foundation of something much bigger. I grabbed my keys and headed downstairs to my Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since college. The streets of Logan Square were alive with Friday night energy. Young professionals spilling out of craft beer bars and couples walking hand in hand past the murals that decorated nearly every building. This neighborhood had character, history, authenticity. It wasn't trying to impress anyone, which was probably why Marcus hated it so much. The drive to the rooftop venue took me through the heart of Chicago, past the construction cranes and scaffolding that marked the city's endless transformation. Each building site told a story of ambition and progress, of someone's vision becoming reality through steel and concrete. As I navigated the traffic on North Michigan Avenue, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Marcus lived in a world of presentations and proposals, of concepts and campaigns that existed mainly in PowerPoint slides and Instagram posts. I lived in a world where ideas became buildings, where blueprints became homes, where dreams literally rose from the ground up. The venue was everything I had expected. Sleek glass elevators carried guests to the 32nd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Chicago skyline. The crowd was exactly the type Marcus loved to surround himself with. Young professionals who measured success in designer labels and restaurant check-ins. People who spoke loudly about their achievements and quietly worried about their credit card bills. I recognized several faces from his social media posts. The same group that appeared in every photo, always smiling, always holding drinks, always performing the theater of having made it. Marcus spotted me the moment I stepped off the elevator. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his arm wrapped around Lisa Chen, whose engagement ring caught the light from every angle as she gestured dramatically while telling some story to a captivated audience. She was beautiful in that carefully constructed way that required hours of preparation and hundreds of dollars in products. Her social media presence built on lifestyle content that made ordinary moments look like magazine spreads. "Emma," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the room with practiced enthusiasm. "Everyone, this is my little sister Emma. She's the artist in the family." The way he said artist made it sound like a polite way of saying unemployed. Several people turned to look at me with that mixture of curiosity and pity, reserved for the quirky family members who haven't figured out how to adult properly. I smiled and shook hands with Lisa, who gave me the kind of hug that doesn't actually involve any physical contact. "Emma, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Marcus has told me so much about you." Her tone was sweet but carried an undertone that suggested the stories hadn't been particularly flattering. "I love your dress, it's so vintage." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely meaning it. "Congratulations on your engagement. Marcus is lucky to have found someone who clearly makes him happy." And he did look happy, in that performative way that suggested he was very aware of how his happiness appeared to others. Lisa beamed and launched into the story of the proposal, which had apparently involved a flash mob in Millennium Park, and a photographer who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. As the evening progressed, I found myself gravitating toward the windows, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Chicago at night was beautiful in a way that never got old. The grid of streets stretching endlessly toward the horizon, each light representing someone's life, someone's dreams, someone's story. From this height, you could see the patterns of development, the way neighborhoods flowed into each other, the careful balance between preservation and progress that made the city work. Quite a view, isn't it? David Thompson appeared beside me, holding 2 glasses of wine. I recognized him from Marcus's LinkedIn posts, though we'd never been formally introduced. He was one of those men who looked successful in a generic way, all confident handshakes and memorized conversation starters. "I'm David, by the way. I work with Marcus at Apex." "Emma," I said, accepting the wine gratefully. "Nice to meet you." "So you're the sister Marcus is always talking about," he said with a grin that suggested he found the whole situation amusing. "The one living the bohemian lifestyle in Logan Square, right? I have to admit, I'm a little jealous. Sometimes I think about what it would be like to just drop out of the rat race. Get a little place somewhere authentic. Maybe write poetry or paint landscapes." I took a sip of wine to avoid responding immediately. This was the narrative Marcus had constructed about my life, and I had learned that correcting it often created more problems than it solved. "Logan Square is a great neighborhood," I said carefully. "Very creative community." "I bet. Much more interesting than River North, I'm sure. All those glass towers and chain restaurants get old after a while. Though I have to say, Marcus's place is pretty incredible. Have you seen the Harrison Tower? That's the building he's trying to get into. 42 floors of pure luxury, but apparently the waiting list is impossible. The developers are incredibly selective about who gets approved." My grip tightened almost imperceptibly on the wine glass. "Is that right?" "Oh yeah, Marcus has been trying to get in for months. It's this company called Rivera Development Group, and they're supposedly really particular about maintaining the right kind of community. Marcus thinks they're just being elitist, but honestly, I kind of respect it. Not everyone should have access to that level of luxury, you know?" I nodded slowly, watching the reflection of the room in the window glass. "That makes sense. I'm sure they have their reasons." "Absolutely. Marcus keeps saying he's going to find a way to get connected to someone who knows someone, but from what I hear, the owner is pretty mysterious. Very private, very selective. Probably some old money family or foreign investor who doesn't want to deal with social climbers." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my elbow, his voice booming with the kind of confidence that comes from 3 drinks and a captive audience. "David, I see you've met my sister. Emma, what do you think of the venue? Pretty amazing, right? This is the kind of place I'm hoping to host events once Lisa and I get into the Harrison Tower." Lisa materialized beside him, her phone already out and angled for a selfie. "Oh my God, Marcus, did you tell her about the Harrison Tower? It's going to be our dream home. Marcus has been working so hard to get us approved, But these developers are being so difficult. They act like they're doing us a favor by even considering our application. It's just business, Marcus said, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. They're probably trying to drive up demand by being exclusive. Classic marketing strategy. Though I have to say, their communication is terrible. I've been trying to get a meeting with someone from Rivera Development for weeks, and they keep giving me the runaround. I sipped my wine and watched the city lights, feeling that familiar mixture of amusement and sadness that came with these family gatherings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus was so close to the truth, and yet so far from understanding it. The Harrison Tower wasn't just another development project to me. It was the culmination of 5 years of careful planning, strategic investments, and countless sleepless nights spent reviewing architectural plans and financial projections. It was proof that quiet ambition could achieve more than loud self-promotion. Maybe they're just being careful, I suggested. Big investments like that require the right kind of tenants. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying that edge of condescension I knew so well. Emma, you wouldn't understand the real estate market. It's all about connections and leverage. These developers think they can play games, but eventually they need to fill those units. They'll come around. David chuckled and raised his glass. Well, here's to Marcus, eventually wearing them down. Though I have to say, Emma, your brother is nothing if not persistent. He's already talking about throwing a housewarming party once they get approved. That's assuming we get approved, Lisa said, her Instagram smile faltering slightly. I mean, we will, obviously. Marcus is incredibly successful, and my social media presence would be great for their brand. But these people are taking forever to make a decision. The conversation drifted to other topics, but I found myself thinking about that application, sitting in my secure email, the one that had arrived 6 months ago, with Marcus's financial information, employment history, and references. On paper, he looked good. Steady income, decent credit score, no major red flags. But there had been something about the tone of his cover letter, the way he'd written about elevating his lifestyle and networking with the right kind of people, that had given me pause. It wasn't that Marcus was unqualified. He could afford the rent, and he had a stable job. But the Harrison Tower wasn't just about money. It was about creating a community of people who understood that true success wasn't measured in Instagram followers or flashy possessions. It was about building something meaningful, something that would last beyond the next trend or social media algorithm. As the evening wore on, I found myself observing the party with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Marcus worked the room with practiced ease, introducing Lisa to everyone as his incredible fiancée, and making sure to mention his job title at least 3 times per conversation. Lisa documented everything, her phone constantly out, capturing moments that would later be filtered and captioned and shared with her 15,000 followers. They weren't bad people. They were just living their lives according to a script that prioritized appearance over substance, performance over authenticity. In Marcus's world, success was something you displayed, not something you quietly built. And maybe that worked for him, maybe that was enough. But it wasn't enough for me. Around 10 o'clock, as the crowd began to thin and the alcohol loosened tongues, Marcus found me again. This time, he wasn't smiling. His face had that slightly flushed look that came from too many drinks and too much networking, and his voice carried an edge that suggested the evening hadn't gone exactly as planned. Emma, can I talk to you for a minute? He said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Privately? I followed him to a quiet corner of the rooftop, away from the clusters of guests and the photographer who had been documenting the evening. The Chicago skyline stretched out before us, and for a moment, I was reminded of all the times we'd looked out at the city together as kids, dreaming about the lives we'd build and the success we'd achieve. Look, Marcus said, his voice lower now, more serious. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. I waited, watching his face in the soft light from the party behind us. Mom and Dad have been helping you with rent, haven't they? The question caught me off guard. What? Come on, Emma, I know you're struggling. I've seen your apartment. I know what you do for work. There's no way you're making enough to live in Chicago. even in Logan Square. And I know Mom and Dad. They'd rather cut off their own hands than let one of their kids fail. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Marcus, I pay my own rent. I have a job. I'm not struggling. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Emma, I make $65,000 a year, and I can barely afford my place. You're working part-time at some nonprofit or art gallery or whatever, living in a studio apartment, with furniture from Goodwill. The math doesn't work. You don't know anything about my finances, I said quietly. I know enough, he replied. And look, I'm not judging you. I'm actually trying to help. Lisa and I have been talking, and once we get married, once we're in the Harrison Tower, we'll have more space. We could probably help you out, maybe let you stay in the guest room until you get back on your feet. The offer was meant to be generous, I realized. In Marcus's mind, he was being the successful older brother, extending a helping hand to his struggling sister. He had no idea that his help would involve me staying in a building I owned, paying rent to tenants I had carefully selected, living as a guest in a space that existed because of my vision and my investment. That's very kind of you, I said carefully, but I'm fine where I am. Emma, there's no shame in accepting help. I know pride is important, but sometimes you have to be practical. You can't live in denial forever. Denial. The word hit me like a physical blow. Here was my brother, standing in front of a building I owned, talking about moving into an apartment he couldn't afford without my approval, offering to help me out of a situation that existed only in his imagination, and accusing me of living in denial. I'm not in denial about anything, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Come on, Emma. When was the last time you bought something new? When was the last time you went on a vacation, or ate at a nice restaurant, or did anything that didn't involve counting every penny? You're 28 years old, and you're living like a college student. I looked out at the city lights, at the buildings that rose like monuments to ambition and achievement. Somewhere out there, construction crews were working on projects I had funded. Families were living in apartments I had designed. Communities were thriving because of investments I had made. But Marcus saw only the surface, the small apartment and the secondhand furniture and the Target dress, and he had built an entire narrative around those details. I'm happy with my life, I said finally. Are you? Marcus challenged. Are you really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're stuck. It looks like you're afraid to take risks, afraid to put yourself out there, afraid to fail. And I get it, Emma. I really do. But at some point, you have to stop playing it safe and start playing to win. The irony was overwhelming. Marcus thought he was the risk taker, the one who played to win, the one who understood how the world really worked. But his biggest risk was a leased BMW and a credit card bill he couldn't quite pay off every month. His idea of winning was getting approved for an apartment he couldn't afford in a building he'd never own. I should probably head home, I said, not trusting myself to say more. Emma, wait! Marcus grabbed my arm gently. I'm sorry if I came on too strong. I just worry about you, okay? You're my sister, and I want to see you succeed. I want to see you happy. I looked at him, at his earnest face and his expensive suit and his genuine concern for my well-being. He meant well. He really did. But his definition of success was so narrow, so focused on the superficial markers of achievement, that he couldn't see the real thing when it was standing right in front of him. I am happy, I said, and I am successful. You just don't recognize what my success looks like. He smiled, the kind of smile adults give to children who insist they're going to be astronauts when they grow up. Okay, Emma, if you say so. I hugged him goodbye, thanked Lisa for including me in their celebration, and made my way back to the elevators. As the doors closed and the party disappeared behind me, I felt the weight of the evening settling on my shoulders. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something more complex, a mixture of sadness and frustration, and a growing certainty that something had to change. The drive back to Logan Square took me through the loop, past the office building where Rivera Development Group officially existed as a suite of rooms I visited maybe once a month. Most of my real work happened from my apartment, from coffee shops, from construction sites, where I appeared as just another consultant with a hard hat and a clipboard. Anonymity was a powerful tool in my industry, allowing me to move through the world without the baggage of reputation or expectation. But as I pulled into my parking spot behind the modest 3-story building where I rented my studio, I found myself questioning that choice. What was the point of building something extraordinary if the people who mattered most to you couldn't even see it? What was the point of success if it looked like failure to everyone else? I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my heels echoing in the empty hallway. Inside, the space felt smaller than usual, the familiar furniture looking shabbier in the harsh light from the overhead fixture. This was what Marcus saw when he looked at my life. This was the evidence he used to construct his narrative about my failure to launch. But he was wrong about almost everything. The furniture wasn't from Goodwill, it was carefully selected vintage pieces that I'd had restored by local artisans. The apartment wasn't cheap, it was strategically chosen for its location and potential. And the job he dismissed as part-time nonprofit work was actually a carefully constructed cover for a business that had quietly revolutionized affordable housing development in Chicago. I sat on my couch, the one Marcus had laughed at earlier, and opened my laptop. The Harrison Tower application was still sitting in my email, still waiting for a decision that I'd been putting off for months. On paper, Marcus and Lisa were qualified tenants. They had stable income, good credit, and no major red flags. But something about approving their application felt like endorsing the very values I'd spent 5 years trying to move beyond. The Harrison Tower was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be a place where success was measured not in Instagram followers or designer labels, but in contribution to community, in commitment to sustainability, in understanding that true luxury came from living authentically rather than performatively. Every tenant I'd approved so far had been chosen not just for their ability to pay rent, but for their potential to be part of something bigger. Marcus and Lisa weren't bad people, but they represented everything I'd been trying to escape. They were caught up in the performance of success, the endless cycle of earning and spending and displaying that kept people trapped in lives they couldn't actually afford. Approving their application would be like admitting that my vision for the Harrison Tower was just another form of the same old game. But they were also my family. And despite everything, despite the condescension and the assumptions, and the complete inability to see me as I actually was, I loved them. The question was whether love required enabling their illusions or challenging them. I closed the laptop and looked around my apartment one more time, seeing it through both sets of eyes. Through Marcus's eyes, it was evidence of failure, of someone who had given up on achieving anything meaningful. Through my own eyes, it was home, a space that reflected my values and my choices, and my refusal to let other people's expectations define my worth. Tomorrow, I would have to make a decision about the Harrison Tower application, but tonight I was content to sit in my small apartment, surrounded by my carefully chosen possessions, building something extraordinary that almost nobody knew existed. The city lights twinkled beyond my windows, and somewhere out there, construction crews were working through the night on projects that would outlast every social media post and every performance of success. That was the kind of legacy I wanted to build, the kind of impact I wanted to have. Marcus could keep his River North penthouse dreams and his flashy lifestyle. I would keep building, quietly and steadily, until the day came when the truth could no longer be ignored. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made Chicago feel alive with possibility. I had slept poorly, my mind churning over Marcus's words from the night before, the way he'd looked at me with that mixture of pity and frustration that suggested he genuinely believed he was helping. By 7 a.m. I was already dressed and heading out for my weekly ritual, a long walk through my neighborhood that usually helped clear my head and remind me why I'd chosen to build my life here. Logan Square was just waking up as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The coffee shops were opening their doors, releasing the rich aroma of freshly ground beans into the morning air. Young families were emerging from their apartments, parents pushing strollers while older children rode bikes on the sidewalk. This was the kind of authentic urban community that Marcus dismissed as, quote, playing house in poverty, but to me it represented everything that made cities work. People choosing to live close together, to walk instead of drive, to support local businesses instead of chain stores, to build relationships with their neighbors instead of hiding behind gated communities and doormen. I stopped at Café Luna, a small family-owned place where the owner, Mrs. Gutierrez, had been serving the neighborhood for 15 years. She greeted me with the kind of warm smile that couldn't be manufactured, the recognition that comes from being a regular customer who was also a genuine member of the community. "Emma, good morning. The usual?" she asked, already reaching for a medium cup. "Please," I said, pulling out my wallet. "How's business been?" "Good, good. We're getting more young professionals moving in, which is nice for business, but I worry about the families who've been here for years. The rents are going up everywhere." She handed me the coffee, steam rising from the small opening in the lid. "My daughter says maybe we should sell the building while we can still get a good price, but this is our home, you know? This is where we belong." I nodded, understanding the dilemma better than she realized. Gentrification was a double-edged sword, bringing investment and opportunities while also displacing the very communities that made neighborhoods special in the first place. It was one of the reasons I'd been so careful about the Harrison Tower project, ensuring that the luxury development included affordable housing components and community spaces that would benefit long-term residents, not just wealthy newcomers. "I hope you decide to stay," I said sincerely. "Places like this are what make the neighborhood special." Mrs. Gutierrez smiled and patted my hand. "You're a good girl, Emma. Your family should be proud of you." If only she knew how complicated that statement was. I left the cafe and continued my walk, passing the mural-covered walls and small businesses that gave Logan Square its character. This was where I'd chosen to live, not because I couldn't afford anything better, but because I valued authenticity over status, community over isolation, substance over style. But explaining that to Marcus would be like trying to describe color to someone who had only ever seen the world in black and white. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I almost ignored it, assuming it was another work-related update that could wait until Monday. But when I glanced at the screen, I saw Marcus's name, followed by a message that made my stomach drop. "Emma, I feel terrible about last night. Lisa and I want to make it up to you. Can you come over for brunch around noon? We have something we want to discuss with you." I stared at the message, trying to decode the subtext. Marcus didn't usually extend last-minute invitations, especially not ones that involved discussing something. The formal tone suggested this wasn't just a casual family meal, but some kind of intervention or serious conversation. Given his comments about my financial situation the night before, I had a sinking feeling that he and Lisa had spent the morning planning some kind of rescue mission for their struggling sister-in-law. I typed back, "Sure, I'll be there," and immediately regretted it. But curiosity won out over self-preservation, and I found myself genuinely wondering what kind of help Marcus thought I needed. What kind of solution he and Lisa had cooked up for problems that existed only in their imagination. The walk back to my apartment gave me time to prepare mentally for whatever was coming. I'd been through this before with Marcus, the well-meaning attempts to fix my life according to his definition of success. When I'd graduated from college, he'd tried to get me a job at his company, convinced that I just needed to get my foot in the door of the corporate world. When I'd started graduate school, he'd questioned whether more education was really necessary, suggesting that I was using school as an excuse to avoid real-world responsibilities. And now, apparently, he'd decided that my living situation was the problem that needed solving. Back in my apartment, I found myself looking around with fresh eyes, trying to see the space as Marcus and Lisa would see it. The studio was small, maybe 600 square feet, with a kitchen that was essentially a corner with appliances, and a bathroom that required careful choreography to use comfortably. But it was also thoughtfully designed, with built-in storage solutions and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. The furniture was vintage but well-maintained, each piece chosen for both function and aesthetic appeal. The bookshelves were filled with architecture and urban planning texts, mixed with novels and art books that reflected my actual interests rather than what I thought would impress visitors. This was my space, arranged according to my needs and values. But I knew that Marcus would see only the size and the age of the furniture. The lack of granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that he associated with adult success. He would see evidence of limitations rather than choices, of failure rather than intentional living. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing a casual but put-together outfit that struck the right balance between not trying too hard and not giving them more ammunition for their rescue mission. Dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, and comfortable flats that would work for walking but still looked polished enough for a family brunch. I grabbed my keys and headed out, steeling myself for whatever intervention Marcus and Lisa had planned. The drive to River North took me through several different versions of Chicago, from the artistic diversity of Logan Square, through the trendy restaurants and boutiques of Wicker Park, past the tourist attractions of downtown, and finally into the gleaming high-rise district where Marcus had chosen to build his life. The contrast was stark, and I found myself thinking about the invisible boundaries that divided the city into different economic and social zones, the way geography could determine not just where you lived but who you were allowed to become. Marcus's building was everything he'd always wanted, a glass and steel tower that rose 40 floors above the street, with a doorman in a uniform and a lobby that looked like a hotel. I'd been here before, but I never got used to the feeling of being evaluated by the staff, the way they sized up visitors to determine whether they belonged in this rarefied environment. Today, the doorman recognized me and smiled politely, but I could see the question in his eyes as he took in my casual outfit and lack of obvious wealth markers. "Ms. Rodriguez. Good afternoon. Mr. Rodriguez is expecting you." I nodded and headed for the elevators, watching the numbers climb as I rose toward Marcus's apartment on the 32nd floor. The elevator was mirrored, and I caught glimpses of myself from different angles, looking small and understated in a space designed to make people feel important. By the time the doors opened, I had composed myself into the version of Emma that Marcus expected, the slightly struggling younger sister who needed guidance and support. Marcus's apartment was a temple to his vision of success. All clean lines and expensive furniture and a view of the city that cost him almost half his monthly income. Lisa had clearly been involved in the decorating, adding touches that were obviously meant to be photographed for her Instagram account. Everything was perfectly arranged, from the throw pillows on the Italian leather sofa to the coffee table books that no one actually read but that communicated the right kind of cultural sophistication. "Emma!" Lisa greeted me with air kisses and that bright smile that seemed permanently fixed on her face. "You look so cute. I love how you always manage to look so effortless." The compliment was carefully calibrated, praising my appearance while also suggesting that I wasn't trying very hard, that my style was the result of limited options rather than conscious choices. I smiled and thanked her, accepting the glass of mimosa she offered, and settling into the designated spot on the couch. Marcus emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of what looked like professionally prepared brunch items, the kind of spread that cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. He'd changed out of his party clothes into perfectly fitted casual wear, jeans, and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit but was designed to look effortlessly expensive. "Emma, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, setting the tray down on the coffee table. "Lisa and I have been thinking about our conversation last night, and we realized we might have come across as, well, maybe a little intense." I sipped my mimosa and waited for him to continue. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city sprawling in all directions, including the neighborhood where I lived, reduced to a distant blur of lower buildings and tree-lined streets. "The thing is," Lisa jumped in, "we really do want to help. Marcus has told me so much about you, about how talented you are, how much potential you have, and we both think that maybe you just need the right opportunity to really shine." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly, and we think we might have found that opportunity." He reached for his laptop, which had been sitting on the coffee table, and opened it with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested he'd been planning this presentation. "Lisa has been working with this amazing company, a lifestyle brand that's looking for creative content creators. They're specifically interested in authentic voices, people who can speak to the experience of young professionals trying to make it in Chicago." Lisa leaned forward, her excitement apparently genuine. The pay isn't huge to start, but it's flexible, and there's so much room for growth. Plus, you'd be working with me, so I could help you navigate the industry, introduce you to the right people, help you build your personal brand. I stared at them, trying to process what they were offering. They wanted to help me become a content creator, to build a personal brand around being a struggling young professional in Chicago. They were offering to help me monetize the very life they pitied, to turn my supposed financial struggles into social media content that would generate income, while also serving as inspiration for other people who were, quote, trying to make it. That's very thoughtful of you both, I said carefully, but I'm not really interested in social media content creation. Marcus's face fell slightly. Emma, I know it might seem intimidating, but this could be exactly what you need to turn things around. You're already living the lifestyle, you might as well get paid for it. Living the lifestyle? I repeated. You know, Lisa said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. The whole authentic, down-to-earth, making it work with less thing. People love that kind of content. It's very relatable. I took another sip of my mimosa, buying time while I figured out how to respond. They genuinely believed they were helping me, offering a solution to problems I didn't actually have. But their solution required me to perform a version of myself that bore no resemblance to who I actually was. To make content about struggling financially while secretly owning the building they were desperate to move into. I appreciate the thought, I said finally, but I'm happy with my current work situation. Marcus and Lisa exchanged a look that suggested they'd anticipated this response and had prepared for it. Marcus cleared his throat and leaned forward, adopting the kind of serious expression he probably used in client meetings. Emma, can we be honest with each other for a minute? I mean really honest. No family politics, no hurt feelings, just truth? I nodded, curious despite myself, about what version of truth Marcus thought we needed to discuss. You're 28 years old, living in a studio apartment, working part-time at some non-profit that probably pays minimum wage. You haven't traveled anywhere in years, you haven't bought anything new for yourself in months, and you're driving a car that's older than most college freshmen. That's not sustainable, Emma. That's not a life plan, that's treading water. Lisa reached over and squeezed my hand. We're not judging you, Emma. We've all been there. I spent 3 years after college living with roommates and eating ramen every night, trying to make it as an influencer. But at some point, you have to be strategic about your future. Strategic how? I asked. Well, for starters, you need to think about your living situation, Marcus said. I know you love Logan Square, but you're paying too much for too little space. You could get a much better deal if you were willing to consider other neighborhoods, maybe get a roommate, maybe look into some of the newer developments that are offering incentives for young professionals. I almost laughed at the irony. Marcus was suggesting that I move out of my carefully chosen neighborhood into one of the newer developments. Probably one that I had either built or competed against. He was offering to help me find a cheaper apartment in a building that existed because of my investment decisions. What kind of newer developments? I asked. Lisa brightened, clearly excited to share her research. There are so many options. That new place in Pilsen has studios starting at $800, and there's a building in Bridgeport that's offering 2 months free rent for new tenants. Plus, if you're willing to go a little further out, there are some really nice places in neighborhoods that are just starting to develop. Just starting to develop, I repeated. You mean gentrifying? Marcus waved his hand dismissively. Emma, gentrification is just urban development. It's progress. These neighborhoods needed investment, and developers are providing it. You shouldn't feel guilty about being part of that process. I don't feel guilty, I said. I just think it's complicated. Everything's complicated if you overthink it, Lisa said. The point is, you have options. You don't have to stay stuck in an expensive apartment in a neighborhood that's already peaked. You could move somewhere with more potential, somewhere that's growing. The conversation was surreal in its complete inversion of reality. They were suggesting that I leave my intentionally chosen neighborhood for a cheaper place in an area that was just starting to develop, not realizing that I was probably the developer they were talking about. That the buildings offering incentives to young professionals were likely projects I had funded or competed against. I'll think about it, I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Marcus smiled, apparently taking my non-commitment as progress. Good. And Emma, about the content creation thing, I know it seems scary, but Lisa really knows what she's doing. She's built her following from nothing, and she could help you do the same thing. It's not scary, I said. It's just not what I want to do with my life. But what do you want to do? Lisa asked, and for the first time her question seemed genuine rather than leading. I mean, long term, what's your plan? I looked at them both. These two people who genuinely cared about me but couldn't see past their own assumptions about what success looked like. How could I explain that I'd already achieved everything they thought I was striving for? That I'd built a business that was more successful than anything they could imagine? That I'd chosen to live modestly not because I couldn't afford luxury, but because I valued different things? I want to build something meaningful, I said finally. Something that lasts. Marcus nodded encouragingly. That's great, Emma. That's exactly the kind of attitude that could make you successful in content creation. People want authenticity. They want to follow someone who has real goals and real values. Lisa pulled out her phone and started scrolling through what looked like analytics or demographics. Marcus is right. The lifestyle and motivation space is huge right now. If you could document your journey, show people how you're working toward your goals despite the challenges, it could be really powerful. I realized that they were going to keep pushing this idea, that they'd convinced themselves that turning my life into content was the solution to problems I didn't have. They were so invested in their narrative about my struggles that they couldn't hear what I was actually saying. I need to use the bathroom, I said, standing up abruptly. Excuse me for a minute. I walked down the hallway toward Marcus's guest bathroom, passing the bedroom where I could see clothes scattered on the bed and makeup scattered across the dresser. This was the life they thought I should aspire to, the success they thought I should envy. But all I could see was the stress behind the performance, the credit card bills hidden behind the Instagram posts, the constant pressure to maintain an image that required more money than they actually had. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, which wasn't surprising given how little sleep I'd gotten the night before. But I also looked determined, like someone who had finally reached a decision point and was ready to act on it. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it expecting another work-related update. Instead, I saw a message from my assistant, Alex Warren, who handled most of the day-to-day operations for Rivera Development Group. Emma, I know it's Saturday, but we just received another inquiry about the Harrison Tower penthouse. High-profile client, willing to pay above asking price for immediate occupancy. Should I schedule a showing? I stared at the message, thinking about the irony of the situation. Here I was, in Marcus's expensive apartment, listening to him and Lisa plan my rescue from a life of poverty, while someone was offering to pay premium prices for a space in a building I owned. The penthouse they were asking about was probably worth more than Marcus made in 5 years, and they were willing to pay extra for the privilege of living there. I typed back, not yet, still deciding about current applications. The Harrison Tower had been designed as more than just a luxury building. It was supposed to be a statement about what urban development could be when it prioritized community and sustainability over pure profit. Every decision, from the materials used in construction to the selection of tenants, had been made with the goal of creating something that would improve the city rather than just extracting wealth from it. But Marcus and Lisa's application forced me to confront the reality that my vision for the building might be incompatible with my desire to help my family. They weren't bad people, but they represented everything I'd been trying to move beyond. Approving their application would be like admitting that money trumped values, that family obligations mattered more than principles. I walked back to the living room, where Marcus and Lisa were still scrolling through their phones, probably researching more opportunities for me to monetize my supposed struggles. They looked up when I entered, both smiling expectantly. Feel better? Lisa asked. Much, I said, settling back into my designated spot on the couch. So tell me more about this content creation opportunity. What exactly would I be documenting? Marcus's face lit up. That's the beauty of it, Emma. You'd just be documenting your real life. Your apartment, your neighborhood, your daily routine. People want to see how someone like you lives, how you make it work on a limited budget. Someone like me? You know, Lisa said, young, creative, idealistic. Someone who's chosen to prioritize experiences over material things, who's building a life based on values rather than just chasing money. I nodded slowly, beginning to understand the full scope of what they were offering. They wanted me to become a professional version of myself, to perform authenticity for people who were looking for alternatives to the lifestyle that Marcus and Lisa had chosen. They wanted me to be the poster child for living well on less, the inspiration for people who couldn't afford the luxury they thought they needed. "And this would be a full-time job?" I asked. "It could be," Lisa said. "If you're successful, if you build the right kind of following, you could make this your career. Sponsored content, brand partnerships, maybe even a book deal if you get popular enough." Marcus leaned forward. "Emma, this could be your chance to turn your lifestyle into a business. You're already living authentically, you might as well get paid for it." I looked around the apartment, at the expensive furniture and the carefully curated decor, and the view that cost half of Marcus's income. They were offering to help me monetize the very life they pitied, to turn my supposed limitations into a brand that would generate income while also serving as inspiration for people who were trying to make it. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Of course," Marcus said. "But Emma, don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around every day." Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "Plus, the sooner you start, the sooner you can begin building your audience. It takes time to develop a following, but once you do, the possibilities are endless." I finished my mimosa and stood up, suddenly feeling claustrophobic in the perfectly arranged space. "Thank you for brunch, and for thinking of me. I really do appreciate it." "Of course," Marcus said, standing to walk me to the door. "Emma, I know this is a lot to process, but I really think this could be the answer you've been looking for." "The answer to what?" "To finding your path," he said. "To building a life that makes you happy." I hugged them both goodbye and headed for the elevator, my mind racing with everything they'd said. They were so convinced that I was struggling, so certain that I needed their help, that they'd created an entire rescue plan based on a complete misunderstanding of my situation. And the most frustrating part was that they genuinely meant well, that their condescension came from love rather than malice. The elevator ride down gave me time to process the full scope of what had just happened. Marcus and Lisa had offered to help me monetize my supposed poverty, to turn my life into content that would serve as inspiration for other people who were, quote, trying to make it. They wanted me to perform authenticity for people who were looking for alternatives to the lifestyle that they themselves had chosen. But the real kicker was that they were offering to help me find a cheaper apartment in a building that I probably owned, to leave my intentionally chosen neighborhood for a place that was just starting to develop, meaning a place where I was likely the developer they were talking about. As I walked out of the building and back to my car, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. I'd been content to let Marcus and Lisa believe whatever they wanted about my life, to let them construct their narratives about my struggles and their success. But their offer to help me monetize my supposed poverty had crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. The drive back to Logan Square took me through the same neighborhoods I'd passed earlier, but now I saw them differently. Each building site, each new development, each gentrifying block represented someone's vision of what the city could become. And I realized that I'd been so focused on building quietly, on maintaining my anonymity, that I'd forgotten the importance of standing up for what I believed in. By the time I pulled into my parking spot behind my building, I had made a decision. It was time to stop letting other people define my success. Time to stop hiding behind the comfortable fiction that humility was the same as invisibility. Marcus and Lisa's offer had been the wake-up call I needed, the reminder that silence wasn't always golden. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Inside, the space felt different, not smaller or shabbier, but more purposeful. This was where I'd chosen to live, where I'd built something meaningful, where I'd proven that success didn't have to look like everyone else's vision of achievement. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the Harrison Tower application that had been sitting in my email for months. Marcus and Lisa's faces stared back at me from the attached photos, smiling and confident and completely unaware that they were asking permission to live in a building owned by the sister they were trying to rescue. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my doorstep. I was still in my pajamas, nursing my second cup of coffee and reviewing construction reports on my laptop, when the buzzer rang. Through the intercom, I heard Marcus's voice, slightly muffled but unmistakably agitated. "Emma, it's me. Can I come up? We need to talk." I glanced at the clock. It was barely 9 a.m., which meant something significant had happened since our brunch yesterday. Marcus wasn't an early riser, and he definitely wasn't the type to show up unannounced unless there was some kind of emergency or crisis that required immediate attention. "Come on up," I said, buzzing him in while quickly shutting my laptop. The construction reports and financial projections scattered across my coffee table would raise questions I wasn't ready to answer, so I gathered them into a neat stack and slid them into my desk drawer. Marcus appeared at my door 3 minutes later, looking like he'd thrown on clothes without much thought. His hair was disheveled, his jeans were wrinkled, and he was wearing a Northwestern sweatshirt that had seen better days. This was not the carefully curated version of Marcus that usually appeared in public, which meant whatever had brought him here was serious enough to override his usual attention to appearance. "Coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Please," he said, settling onto my couch with the kind of heavy sigh that suggested he was carrying more weight than just his physical presence. "Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise me you won't freak out." I poured coffee into a mug and handed it to him, noting the way his hands trembled slightly as he accepted it. "What's going on?" "It's about the Harrison Tower," he said, taking a sip of coffee and grimacing slightly. "The building I've been trying to get into. I found out yesterday that my application was rejected." I felt my stomach drop, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that. Did they give you a reason?" "That's the thing," Marcus said, leaning forward and setting his mug down on the coffee table with more force than necessary. "They didn't just reject it. They sent this incredibly condescending letter about how I don't fit their quote, community values, and how they're looking for tenants who understand the difference between luxury and ostentation." I sat down across from him, processing this information. I hadn't sent any rejection letter yet, which meant someone else at Rivera Development Group had made the decision without consulting me. Alex Warren, my assistant, had been handling most of the Harrison Tower applications, and I'd given him general guidelines about the type of tenants we were looking for, but I'd specifically asked him to hold off on Marcus's application until I made a final decision. "That does sound harsh," I said carefully. "Harsh?" Marcus stood up abruptly, beginning to pace around my small living space. "Emma, they basically called me a shallow social climber. They said my application demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Harrison Tower represents, and that they were concerned about my ability to contribute positively to their community." I watched him pace, noting the way his agitation was making my apartment feel even smaller than usual. His long strides covered the distance from the kitchen to the window in just a few steps, and he seemed to be struggling with the confined space in a way that made his frustration feel more intense. "Did you talk to them about it? Maybe there was some kind of misunderstanding." "I tried," Marcus said, stopping in front of my bookshelf and staring at the titles without really seeing them. "I called their management company, Rivera Development Group, and tried to get a meeting with someone who could explain the decision. But they're impossible to reach. It's like they exist in some parallel universe where normal business practices don't apply." The irony was almost overwhelming. Marcus was complaining about my company's communication practices while standing in my apartment, asking for my sympathy and support. He was frustrated by policies I had implemented, angry about decisions that had been made by people who worked for me, seeking comfort from the very person who had the power to change everything he was upset about. "Maybe it's for the best," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle. "If they don't think you're a good fit, then maybe the building isn't right for you anyway." Marcus turned to face me, his expression shifting from frustration to something closer to disbelief. "Emma, this isn't just about the apartment. This is about principle. These people think they can judge me based on some arbitrary criteria, decide that I'm not good enough for their precious community without even meeting me. But maybe their criteria aren't arbitrary," I said. "Maybe they have specific reasons for being selective." "Like what?" Marcus demanded. What possible reason could they have for rejecting someone with stable employment, good credit, and the ability to pay rent on time? What more do they want? I took a sip of my coffee, buying time while I tried to figure out how to respond. The truth was that Marcus's application had been rejected because Alex had followed the guidelines I'd given him about prioritizing tenants who understood that luxury was about quality of life rather than status symbols. Marcus's cover letter had been full of references to networking opportunities and social media potential, suggesting that he saw the Harrison Tower as a platform for advancing his image rather than as a home. Maybe they want people who see the building as a place to live, not as a place to be seen, I suggested. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his expression shifting through several emotions before settling on something that looked like hurt. Emma, I can't believe you're taking their side. These people rejected me without even giving me a chance to explain myself, and you're defending them. I'm not defending anyone, I said. I'm just trying to understand their perspective. Their perspective is that people like us don't belong in places like that, Marcus said, his voice rising. They're elitist snobs who think that having money gives them the right to decide who deserves to live in their building. The accusation stung, even though I knew he wasn't directing it at me personally. But the way he said people like us revealed something about how he saw our family, our background, our place in the world. He thought we were outsiders trying to break into a system that didn't want us, not realizing that I wasn't trying to break in at all. I was the system, or at least part of it. Marcus, maybe you're taking this too personally, I said. There are other buildings, other opportunities. That's not the point, he said, resuming his pacing. The point is that these developers think they can treat people like applications in a pile, making decisions based on some secret criteria that nobody else understands. They have no accountability, no transparency, no respect for the people who are trying to build lives in this city. I found myself in the strange position of listening to my brother criticize my business practices while asking for my emotional support. Every complaint he made was technically accurate. Rivera Development Group was selective. We did have criteria that weren't fully transparent, and we did make decisions that affected people's lives without always explaining our reasoning. But those practices existed for reasons that Marcus couldn't see, reasons that were designed to create communities rather than just fill apartments. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know, Marcus said, slumping back onto the couch. Lisa is devastated. She had her whole Instagram strategy planned around the Harrison Tower, all these posts about our new life in this amazing building. Now she's embarrassed, and I feel like I've let her down. The mention of Lisa's Instagram strategy confirmed exactly why the application had been rejected. Alex had been trained to spot applicants who saw the building as a brand opportunity rather than a home, and Lisa's social media presence would have been an immediate red flag. I'm sure she'll understand, I said. There will be other opportunities. Will there? Marcus asked. Emma, I'm 31 years old. I have a good job, I make decent money, I've never been in legal trouble, or defaulted on a loan. I should be able to rent an apartment in my own city without having to pass some kind of character test, administered by people who don't even have the courage to meet me face to face. I felt a pang of guilt, recognizing that Marcus's frustration was partly my fault. I'd been so focused on maintaining my anonymity that I'd created a system where people like my brother felt shut out and judged by faceless bureaucrats. But I'd also seen what happened when developers prioritized profit over community, when buildings became investments rather than homes. Maybe you could appeal the decision, I suggested, or ask for a meeting to explain your position. Marcus shook his head. I already tried. They said the decision was final, that they don't provide detailed explanations for rejection decisions, and that I should look for housing opportunities that better match my lifestyle and values. The phrasing sounded like Alex's work, diplomatic but firm. He'd been with Rivera Development Group for 3 years, and he'd learned to deliver rejections in a way that was professional but discouraging further contact. The problem was that he'd never had to deliver a rejection to his boss's brother. I'm sorry this happened, I said, meaning it sincerely. I know how much you wanted that apartment. It's not just about the apartment, Marcus said. It's about what this says about who I am, about who we are as a family. These people looked at my application and decided that I wasn't good enough for their community. They judged me based on their assumptions about what kind of person I am. I stared at him, struck by the irony of his complaint. Marcus was upset about being judged based on assumptions, but he'd spent the last 2 days making assumptions about my life, my finances, my career prospects, and my need for his help. He was angry about being evaluated by people who didn't really know him, while simultaneously trying to rescue me from problems that existed only in his imagination. "Marcus," I said slowly, "don't you think it's possible that you're making assumptions about them too? Maybe they had reasons for their decision that you don't understand." "Like what?" he challenged. "What possible reason could justify rejecting someone without even meeting them?" "Maybe they were looking for something specific," I said. "Maybe they had a vision for the kind of community they wanted to create, and they thought other applicants were a better fit for that vision." Marcus stood up again, his agitation returning. "Emma, listen to yourself. You're defending a system that treats people like commodities, that makes decisions based on abstract concepts like, quote, community vision, instead of concrete qualifications like income and credit score. Maybe community vision is more important than you think," I said. "Maybe they understand something about creating successful communities that goes beyond just filling apartments with people who can afford the rent." "You sound like one of them," Marcus said, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "You sound like you think they're justified in rejecting people based on their arbitrary standards." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. In trying to defend the principles behind my business, I'd inadvertently revealed my alignment with the very people Marcus saw as his enemies. I was one of them, but I couldn't tell him that without destroying the relationship we'd built over the past 28 years. "I'm not defending anyone," I said. "I'm just trying to understand all sides of the situation." "There's only one side that matters," Marcus said. "The side that says people deserve to be treated with respect, that says you can't judge someone's character from a rental application, that says communities are built by bringing different people together, not by excluding anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable." I looked at him, standing in the middle of my small apartment, passionate and articulate, and completely convinced of his own righteousness. He was right about some things. People did deserve to be treated with respect, and communities were stronger when they included diverse perspectives. But he was also wrong about others, particularly his assumption that selectivity was automatically elitist, and that all exclusion was unjustified. "What if I told you that the developers might not be the villains you think they are?" I asked carefully. "Then I'd say you're being naive," Marcus replied. "Emma, these people have power, and they're using it to keep people like us out of spaces we've earned the right to occupy. They're gatekeepers protecting their exclusive club from anyone who might threaten their sense of superiority. People like us? Working-class people who've managed to achieve some success," Marcus said. "People who didn't inherit their wealth or their connections, who had to work for everything they have. People who might not know the right codes or have the right pedigree, but who deserve the same opportunities as anyone else." I felt a strange mixture of pride and frustration listening to him. Pride because he was articulating values I shared, the belief that success should be earned rather than inherited, that opportunities should be available to people regardless of their background. But frustration because he was applying those values to a situation he didn't understand, making assumptions about my motivations and my company's practices that were both right and wrong in complicated ways. "Marcus, what if the developers were trying to create something positive? What if their selectivity was about building a community that would benefit everyone, not just the wealthy?" "Then they're going about it the wrong way," Marcus said. "You can't build inclusive communities by excluding people. You can't create positive change by reinforcing the same old barriers that have always kept working-class people out of nice neighborhoods." He was right, and he was wrong, and I didn't know how to explain the difference without revealing information that would change everything between us. Rivera Development Group's selectivity was designed to prevent exactly the kind of gentrification that displaced working-class families, but it was also designed to prevent the kind of performative luxury that Marcus and Lisa represented. "I need to use the bathroom," I said, standing up abruptly. "Give me a minute." In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. This was the moment I'd been dreading for months, the collision between my public identity and my private life. Marcus was angry and hurt and looking for support from his sister, but I was the person who had hurt him, even if he didn't know it yet. My phone buzzed with a text message from Alex Warren. Emma, I sent the Harrison Tower rejection letters on Friday as requested. Should I expect any follow-up communications? I stared at the message, realizing that Alex had sent the rejection letter based on his standard evaluation criteria, not knowing that one of the rejected applicants was my brother. He'd been following the guidelines I'd given him, prioritizing applicants who demonstrated an understanding of community values over those who saw the building as a status symbol. I typed back, "We may need to discuss some of the recent decisions. I'll call you tomorrow." When I returned to the living room, Marcus was standing by the window, looking out at the street below. The morning sun was streaming through the glass, creating patterns on the floor that shifted as clouds moved across the sky. "Emma," he said without turning around, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay, do you think I'm the kind of person who doesn't deserve to live in a nice building? Do you think there's something about me, about us, that makes us unsuitable for places like the Harrison Tower?" The question broke my heart. Marcus was asking me to validate his worth as a person, to reassure him that his rejection wasn't a reflection of his character or his value as a human being. But I was also the person who had created the criteria that led to his rejection, who had built a system that prioritized certain values over others. "Marcus, you deserve to live wherever you want to live," I said. "You're a good person, a hard worker, a loyal friend and brother. Any building would be lucky to have you as a tenant." "Then why don't they want me?" he asked, finally turning to face me. "What did I do wrong?" I looked at him, at the genuine confusion and hurt in his eyes, and realized that I'd been wrong about something fundamental. I'd assumed that Marcus's interest in the Harrison Tower was purely about status, about having the right address and the right lifestyle accessories. But sitting here in my apartment, watching him struggle with the rejection, I could see that it was about something deeper. Marcus wanted to belong. He wanted to be part of something bigger than himself, to live in a place that reflected his values and his aspirations. He wanted to be recognized as someone who had earned his success, someone who deserved to be included in the communities he admired. The Harrison Tower wasn't just an apartment to him, it was validation that he'd made it, that he'd achieved the American dream that our parents had worked so hard to provide for us. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "Sometimes these things just don't work out the way we want them to." "But that's not good enough," Marcus said. "Emma, I can't just accept that some faceless corporation gets to decide whether I'm worthy of their community. I need to understand why they rejected me, what I could have done differently, what I need to change about myself to be acceptable to them." The desperation in his voice was heartbreaking. Marcus was willing to change himself, to become whoever he thought Rivera Development Group wanted him to be, just to gain acceptance into a community that I had created. He was prepared to sacrifice his authenticity for the approval of people who didn't even know him. "Marcus, you shouldn't have to change yourself for anyone," I said. "If they don't want you as you are, then maybe they're not the right people for you." "But what if they are?" Marcus asked. "What if the Harrison Tower really is everything I thought it was, and I'm just not good enough for it? What if I need to become a better person to deserve the life I want?" I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, though I tried to hide them. Marcus was torturing himself with self-doubt, questioning his worth as a person because of a decision I had made without fully understanding its impact on him. He was ready to transform himself into someone else's idea of an acceptable tenant, not knowing that the someone else was his own sister. "You're already a good person," I said. "You don't need to become anyone else." "Then why wasn't I good enough?" Marcus asked. "Emma, I need you to help me understand this. I need you to help me figure out what I'm missing, what I need to do to become the kind of person who deserves to live in a place like that." I looked at him, at his earnest face and his genuine desire to improve himself, and realized that I was facing an impossible choice. I could continue to let him believe that he'd been rejected by strangers, that he needed to change himself to gain acceptance from people who didn't know him. Or I could tell him the truth, that the rejection had come from me, that I was the faceless corporation he was angry at, that I was the person he needed to prove himself to. "Marcus," I said slowly, "what if I told you that the developers might not be as unreachable as you think? What if there was a way to get a meeting with them, to explain your position and ask for reconsideration? His eyes lit up with hope. Do you think that's possible? Do you know someone who could help? I took a deep breath, knowing that my answer would change everything between us. Maybe, I said. Let me make some calls. Monday morning arrived with the weight of decision pressing down on my shoulders. I had spent most of Sunday night staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation with Marcus, every assumption he'd made about my life, every moment of condescension disguised as concern. By the time dawn broke over Logan Square, I had made my choice. It was time to stop hiding behind anonymity and start standing up for what I believed in. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a tailored navy blazer, black slacks, and low heels that clicked with authority against the sidewalk. This wasn't the understated Emma that Marcus knew, the one who wore Target dresses and carried worn purses. This was Emma Rodriguez, CEO of Rivera Development Group, and it was time for her to make an appearance. The Rivera Development Group offices occupied the entire 40th floor of a glass tower in the Loop, with panoramic views of the city that never failed to remind me why I'd chosen this work. When I walked through the reception area, my assistant Alex Warren looked up from his computer with surprise. Emma, I wasn't expecting you today. Did we have a meeting scheduled? No meeting, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. But we need to talk about the Harrison Tower applications, specifically the Rodriguez application. Alex pulled up the file on his screen, his expression shifting to professional concern. Is there a problem? I followed the standard evaluation criteria we discussed. The applicant's cover letter focused heavily on social media opportunities and networking potential, which triggered our community values screening. I know, I said. And under normal circumstances, you made the right call. But there's something you need to know about this particular applicant. Alex waited, his fingers poised over his keyboard. Marcus Rodriguez is my brother. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex stared at me, his eyes widening as he processed the implications of what I'd just told him. In 3 years of working together, I'd never mentioned my family, never brought personal relationships into our business decisions. Rivera Development Group had been built on the principle of objective evaluation, of treating every application with the same professional detachment. Emma, I had no idea, Alex said finally. If I had known, I would have brought the application to you directly. You couldn't have known, I said. I never told you about my family, and I use my middle name professionally. But that's not the point. The point is that my brother is currently sitting in his apartment, questioning his worth as a person because of a decision we made without fully understanding its impact. Alex leaned back in his chair, clearly struggling with the ethical implications of the situation. What do you want me to do? I can reverse the decision, approve the application, but that would compromise everything we've built here. We can't have different standards for different people. I don't want you to reverse the decision, I said. I want to understand why we made it in the first place, and whether our criteria are actually serving the purpose we intended. For the next hour, we reviewed Marcus's application line by line, analyzing every detail that had led to his rejection. His financial qualifications were solid, his credit score was excellent, and his employment history showed steady progress over the past decade. The problem wasn't with his ability to pay rent or maintain the property. The problem was with his motivation for living there. Look at this paragraph, Alex said, pointing to a section of Marcus's cover letter. He writes about wanting to be part of a community that reflects his success, about networking with like-minded professionals, about the lifestyle opportunities the building would provide. It reads like he sees the Harrison Tower as a platform for advancing his personal brand. I read the paragraph again, trying to see it through fresh eyes. Marcus had written about wanting to live somewhere that matched his achievements, about the importance of surrounding himself with successful people, about the opportunities for growth and connection that the building would provide. To Alex, these were red flags indicating that Marcus saw the apartment as a status symbol, rather than a home. But to me, they were the words of someone who had worked hard to achieve success, and wanted to live in a place that recognized that achievement. Alex, what if we're wrong about this? What if wanting to live somewhere that reflects your success isn't automatically shallow? What if Marcus is looking for community, just in a different way than we anticipated? Alex frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Emma, we developed these criteria for a reason. We've seen what happens when buildings become social media showcases, when tenants treat their apartments as content creation spaces rather than homes. The Harrison Tower was supposed to be different. Different how? Quieter, Alex said. More focused on genuine community rather than performative lifestyle. We wanted people who understood that luxury wasn't about showing off, but about quality of life. I nodded, understanding his point, but also recognizing its limitations. But Alex, who are we to decide what genuine community looks like? Who are we to determine that someone's desire for social connection is performative rather than authentic? Emma, you're the one who established these guidelines, Alex said gently. You said you wanted the Harrison Tower to be more than just another luxury building, that you wanted it to create meaningful community rather than just house wealthy people. He was right, and that was the problem. I had created a system designed to exclude people like Marcus, people who saw success as something to be displayed rather than hidden. But in trying to avoid the superficiality that characterized so many luxury developments, I had potentially created a different kind of elitism, one that valued the appearance of humility over honest ambition. I need to see the other applications, I said. All of them. I want to understand who we've been approving and who we've been rejecting. Alex pulled up the files. And for the next 2 hours, we reviewed every Harrison Tower application from the past 6 months. The pattern was clear and troubling. We had approved applications from people who wrote about seeking quiet communities, about valuing privacy, about wanting to live simply despite their wealth. We had rejected applications from people who mentioned networking, social media, career advancement, or lifestyle aspirations. Alex, look at this, I said, pointing to an approved application. This tenant writes about wanting to escape the pressures of social media, about seeking a quiet retreat from the demands of modern life. But look at his employment history. He's a trust fund baby who's never held a real job. He's not seeking authentic community, he's seeking isolation from the very people who might challenge his privilege. Alex studied the application, his expression growing troubled. And look at this rejected application, he said, pulling up another file. This woman writes about wanting to network with other professionals, about the career opportunities living in the building might provide. But she's a nurse practitioner who's trying to start a clinic in an underserved neighborhood. She's not shallow, she's strategic. We continued reviewing applications, and the pattern became increasingly clear. Our criteria had inadvertently favored people who already had enough wealth and connections to afford privacy and simplicity, while excluding people who saw the building as a stepping stone to greater success. We had created a system that rewarded the appearance of humility while punishing honest ambition. I think we need to reconsider our approach, I said finally. What do you mean? I mean that maybe we've been asking the wrong questions. Maybe instead of trying to exclude people who want to advance their careers or build their networks, we should be asking how they plan to contribute to the community they're joining. Alex nodded slowly. So we evaluate based on contribution rather than motivation? Exactly. Marcus wants to network with successful professionals, but he's also someone who mentors young people at his company, who volunteers with local youth programs, who's genuinely committed to helping other people achieve success. That's the kind of person we should want in our community. But what about the social media aspect? What about people who see the building as a platform for personal branding? I thought about Lisa, about her Instagram strategy and her plan to document their life in the Harrison Tower. Maybe that's not automatically bad either. Maybe if someone is using their platform to promote positive values, to inspire other people, to showcase what's possible when you work hard and achieve success, then their social media presence could actually benefit the community. Alex was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the implications of what I was suggesting. Emma, if we change our criteria now, if we start approving applications we previously rejected, people are going to ask questions. They're going to wonder why our standards suddenly shifted. Let them wonder, I said. We're not changing our standards, we're clarifying them. We're saying that we want people who will contribute to the community, regardless of how they define success or how they choose to share their achievements. And your brother's application? My brother's application should be evaluated on the same criteria as everyone else's. If he can contribute to the community, if he can be a positive neighbor and a good tenant, then he should be approved. The fact that he's my brother shouldn't matter either way. Alex pulled up Marcus's application again, reading it with fresh eyes. Looking at this again, there's actually a lot of positive stuff here. He talks about wanting to give back to the community, about his volunteer work, about his commitment to helping other young professionals succeed. I think I focused too much on the networking language and missed the substance underneath. That's exactly the problem, I said. We've been so focused on avoiding superficiality that we've started rejecting people for being honest about their ambitions. So what do we do now? I took a deep breath, knowing that my next decision would change everything. We approve Marcus's application, but not because he's my brother. We approve it because he meets our revised criteria for community contribution. And then we review all the other rejected applications using the same standards. Emma, that's going to be a lot of work. And it's going to require us to admit that we made mistakes with some of our previous decisions. Then we admit our mistakes, I said. We learn from them and do better going forward. Alex nodded and began typing up the approval letter. Should I mention that this is a reconsideration of a previous decision? No, I said. Just send the standard approval notification. Marcus doesn't need to know that his application was initially rejected. Are you going to tell him about your connection to the building? I considered the question, weighing the pros and cons of revelation. Marcus would eventually find out that I owned the building, especially once he started living there and meeting other tenants. But I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, wasn't ready to explain why I'd hidden my success from my family for so long. Not yet, I said. I need to figure out how to have that conversation without destroying our relationship. Emma, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you hide this from your family? Why didn't you tell them about Rivera Development Group, about your success? I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline. Because I was afraid they wouldn't understand. I was afraid they would see it as proof that I'd changed, that I'd become someone different from the person they knew. I was afraid they would think I was judging them for their choices. But weren't you judging them? Weren't you judging your brother when you designed criteria that would exclude him? The question hit me like a physical blow. Alex was right. I had been judging Marcus, judging his values and his aspirations and his definition of success. I had created a system that reflected my own biases, my own assumptions about what authentic community looked like. I had become the very thing I'd been trying to avoid, someone who used wealth and power to exclude people who didn't share my vision of how success should be expressed. Yes, I said quietly. I was judging him. I was judging all of them. So what changed? What made you realize that your approach was wrong? I thought about Marcus sitting in my apartment, questioning his worth as a person because of a decision I had made without fully understanding its impact. I realized that my brother's pain was real, even if I didn't agree with his values. I realized that my definition of authentic community was just as arbitrary as anyone else's, and that I didn't have the right to impose it on other people. Alex finished typing the approval letter and showed it to me for review. It was standard corporate language, professional and impersonal, but it would give Marcus and Lisa the opportunity they'd been hoping for. It would validate his worth as a person, confirm that he belonged in the community he wanted to join. Send it, I said. Done, Alex replied, clicking the send button. Marcus Rodriguez should receive his approval notification within the next few minutes. I stood up, suddenly feeling the weight of the decision I'd made. Approving Marcus's application was just the beginning. Now I had to figure out how to tell him that his sister was the person behind the company he'd been fighting with, that the faceless corporation he'd been angry at was actually a family business he'd never known existed. Alex, I need to ask you for a favor. Anything. I need you to schedule a meeting with Marcus Rodriguez. Tell him that Rivera Development Group wants to meet with him personally, to welcome him to the Harrison Tower community and discuss his vision for contributing to the building's culture. Alex looked puzzled. Emma, we don't usually do personal meetings with approved tenants. That's going to seem unusual. Tell him it's a new policy, I said. Tell him we're trying to be more personal in our approach, more connected to the people who live in our buildings. When do you want to schedule this meeting? I checked my calendar. knowing that I needed enough time to prepare for what would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock. Conference room B. Should I prepare any materials for the meeting? No, I said. This is going to be a very personal conversation. I left the office that afternoon with a mixture of anticipation and dread. In 4 days, I would sit across from Marcus in a conference room and tell him that his sister was the CEO of Rivera Development Group, that the rejection he'd received was a mistake, that the community he wanted to join was one I had created specifically for people like him. The drive back to Logan Square gave me time to think about what I would say, how I would explain 5 years of secrecy and anonymity. Marcus would be angry, rightfully so. He would feel betrayed, deceived, manipulated. But I hoped that eventually, he would understand that my secrecy had never been about shame or judgment, but about fear. Fear of changing the relationships that mattered most to me. Fear of becoming someone my family didn't recognize. When I arrived at my apartment, I found a text message from Marcus waiting for me. Emma, you're not going to believe this. I just got approved for the Harrison Tower. They want to meet with me personally to discuss my vision for the community. I don't know what you said to them, but whatever it was, it worked. Thank you for believing in me. I stared at the message, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Marcus was happy, excited, validated. He thought I had somehow advocated for him, used my influence to change the minds of people who had initially rejected him. In a way, he was right. I had advocated for him, just not in the way he imagined. I typed back, I'm so happy for you. You deserve this opportunity. I know this might sound crazy, Marcus replied, but I have a feeling this meeting is going to change everything. I have a feeling I'm about to find out that Rivera Development Group is very different from what I initially thought. I smiled, despite the anxiety churning in my stomach. I think you're right about that. Friday afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of October day that made Chicago feel like a city where anything was possible. I arrived at the Rivera Development Group offices early, spending the morning reviewing construction reports and trying to distract myself from the conversation I was about to have. At 2:30, Alex knocked on my door. Emma, Marcus Rodriguez is here for his 3 o'clock meeting. Should I bring him to conference room B? Give me 5 minutes, I said. Then bring him in. I used those 5 minutes to center myself, to remember why I was doing this and what I hoped to accomplish. I wasn't just revealing my identity to Marcus. I was trying to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty, rather than assumption, trying to create the kind of authentic community between us that I had been seeking in my professional life. When the door opened and Marcus walked in, I was struck by how different he looked. He was wearing his best suit, his hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been given a second chance. He was ready to impress, ready to prove that he belonged in the community he'd been fighting to join. Mr. Rodriguez, I said, standing up from my seat at the head of the conference table. Thank you for coming. Marcus stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening as he recognized me. Emma, what are you doing here? Please, sit down, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. We have a lot to talk about. Marcus remained standing, looking confused and slightly suspicious. Emma, I don't understand. Are you working for Rivera Development Group? Are you the person I'm supposed to meet with? In a way, I said. Marcus, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole story before you react. What kind of story? I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would change everything between us. I'm Emma Rodriguez, but I'm also Emma Drace. I'm the CEO of Rivera Development Group. I own the Harrison Tower, and I've been running this company for the past 5 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, understanding. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You're the person who rejected my application. Yes, I said, and I'm also the person who approved it. I don't understand. Sit down, I said again. Please, let me explain. Marcus finally took the seat across from me, his posture rigid with tension. Emma, I've been pouring my heart out to you about this building, about how much it meant to me, about how rejected I felt. And you've been lying to me the entire time. I wasn't lying, I said. I was protecting something I wasn't ready to share. Protecting what? Our relationship, I said. Marcus, I was afraid that if you knew about my success, it would change everything between us. I was afraid you would see me differently, treat me differently, expect things from me that I wasn't ready to give. So instead, you let me think you were struggling? You let me try to help you, try to fix problems you didn't actually have? Yes, I said, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for letting you worry about me, for letting you think I needed rescuing. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from anger to something more complex. Emma, do you have any idea how this feels? Do you have any idea what it's like to find out that your sister has been successful beyond your wildest dreams while you've been treating her like a charity case? I can imagine, I said, and I can imagine how betrayed you must feel right now. Betrayed doesn't begin to cover it, Marcus said. Emma, I've been condescending to you for months, maybe years. I've been offering you advice about your career, your finances, your living situation. I've been trying to help you become successful, not knowing that you were already more successful than I'll ever be. Marcus, your success isn't less valuable because mine is different. You've built a career you're proud of, you're engaged to someone you love, you're contributing to your community. Those things matter. But they don't matter as much as owning a 42-story building, Marcus said. Emma, you're a millionaire. You're probably a multimillionaire. You're more successful than our parents ever dreamed of being, and I've been treating you like you couldn't figure out how to pay rent. Money isn't the only measure of success, I said, and it's not the most important one. Easy for you to say, Marcus replied. You have enough money to say that money doesn't matter. I recognized the anger in his voice, the hurt that came from realizing that everything he'd believed about our relationship was based on incomplete information. But I also heard something else, something that sounded like relief. Marcus, I need you to understand something. I didn't hide my success because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because I was afraid of losing the person I am with you, the person I am with our family. I was afraid that money would change our relationship in ways I couldn't control. But it already has changed our relationship, Marcus said. The fact that you could hide something this big from me for 5 years means our relationship was never what I thought it was. You're right, I said, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for not trusting you enough to share this part of my life. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city skyline. When he spoke again, his voice was calmer, more thoughtful. Emma, why are you telling me this now? Why not continue hiding it? Because I realized that hiding wasn't protecting our relationship, it was preventing it from being real. I realized that I was doing to you what I accused other people of doing to me, making assumptions about your character based on incomplete information. What do you mean? I mean that I designed the Harrison Tower application criteria to exclude people like you. People who were honest about their ambitions and their desire for success. I told myself I was creating authentic community, but I was actually just imposing my own biases on other people. Marcus looked at me with surprise. You created those criteria specifically to exclude me? Not you specifically, I said, but people who shared your values, your approach to success, your willingness to be public about your achievements. I was privileging the appearance of humility over honest ambition. And that's why my application was initially rejected? Yes, I said. And that's why I changed the criteria. I realized that my definition of authentic community was just as arbitrary as anyone else's, and that I didn't have the right to impose it on other people. Marcus was quiet again, processing this information. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Are you approving my application because I'm your brother, or because you genuinely think I'll be a good tenant? I looked at him, recognizing the vulnerability in his question. He needed to know that his acceptance into the Harrison Tower community was based on merit, not favoritism. He needed to know that he belonged there because of who he was, not because of who he was related to. I'm approving your application because you're someone who works hard, who cares about other people, who wants to build something meaningful with your life. I'm approving it because you're the kind of person who makes communities stronger, regardless of how you choose to express your success. And the fact that I'm your brother? The fact that you're my brother makes me proud that you want to live in a building I created. It makes me hope that we can build the kind of authentic community in our family that I've been trying to build in my business. Marcus smiled for the first time since he'd walked into the room. Emma, I'm angry at you for hiding this from me. I'm hurt that you didn't trust me enough to share it. But I'm also incredibly proud of you. What you've built here, what you've accomplished, it's amazing. Thank you, I said. And Marcus, I'm proud of you too. I'm proud of the man you've become, the success you've achieved, the way you care about the people in your life. So what happens now? Now you move into the Harrison Tower, I said. You become part of the community I've been trying to build. And maybe, if you're willing, you help me figure out how to make that community even better. What do you mean? I mean that you have perspectives and experiences that I don't have. You understand what it's like to work for someone else's company, to build success within someone else's system. You understand what it's like to be evaluated by criteria you didn't create, to be judged by standards you don't control. That knowledge could help me create better communities, fairer systems. Marcus nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. And Marcus, there's something else I need to tell you. What? I'm going to tell Mom and Dad about Rivera Development Group. I'm going to tell them about my success, about what I've been building. I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm sure, I said. I'm ready to be proud of what I've accomplished, and I'm ready to let the people I love be proud of me too. Marcus stood up and walked around the table, pulling me into a hug that felt different from any hug we'd shared before. It was the embrace of two adults who had finally seen each other clearly, who had moved beyond assumptions and expectations to something more real. Emma, he said, I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry for all the times I underestimated you. I love you too, I said. And I'm sorry for all the times I hid from you. When I drove home that evening, Logan Square looked different. The small businesses and local restaurants, the mural-covered walls and tree-lined streets, they were still the same. But now they felt like choices rather than limitations, like expressions of my values rather than evidence of my struggles. I pulled into my parking spot behind the modest building where I'd chosen to live, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with that choice. My apartment was small, but it was mine. My furniture was vintage, but it was carefully chosen. My life was authentic, not because I hid my success, but because I was finally ready to own it. That night, I called my parents and told them about Rivera Development Group, about the Harrison Tower, about the business I'd built while they thought I was struggling to find my way. Their pride was overwhelming, but so was their understanding that I was still the same person I'd always been, just with a more complete story. Marcus moved into the Harrison Tower 3 weeks later, and Lisa documented the entire process on her Instagram account. But instead of the shallow lifestyle content I'd been afraid of, her posts were thoughtful reflections on achievement, community, and the importance of supporting each other's dreams. She used her platform to showcase the local businesses in the building, to highlight the sustainability features we'd incorporated, to celebrate the diverse community of people who had chosen to make the Harrison Tower their home. 6 months later, Rivera Development Group launched a new initiative, a program that helped young professionals from working-class backgrounds access affordable housing in quality developments. Marcus helped design the program, drawing on his experience of feeling excluded from communities he'd earned the right to join. The program was successful, but more importantly, it was authentic. It reflected the values that both Marcus and I shared. The belief that success should be accessible to people who work hard regardless of their background, and that communities are strongest when they include diverse perspectives and experiences. I still live in my studio apartment in Logan Square, surrounded by the same furniture and books and carefully chosen possessions that have always reflected my values. But now when people ask about my small apartment, I tell them that it's a choice, not a limitation. I tell them that home isn't about square footage or status symbols, but about living in a place that reflects who you are and what you believe in. Marcus and Lisa are happy in the Harrison Tower, and they've become exactly the kind of community members I'd hoped to attract. They organize events for other tenants, they support local businesses, they use their social media platforms to promote positive values and inspire other people to pursue their dreams. Our relationship is stronger now than it's ever been, built on a foundation of honesty rather than assumption, of mutual respect rather than condescension. We still disagree about things, still have different approaches to success, and different ways of expressing our achievements, but we understand each other now in ways we never did before. Sometimes I think about the person I was before that Friday afternoon in the conference room, the person who hid behind anonymity and judged other people for being honest about their ambitions. I'm grateful that Marcus's pain forced me to confront my own biases, to recognize that authentic community isn't about excluding people who don't share your values, but about including people who are willing to contribute to something bigger than themselves. The Harrison Tower is more than just a building now. It's a community of people who understand that success comes in many forms, that authenticity isn't about hiding your achievements, but about using them to lift other people up. It's a place where my brother can network with other professionals without being judged for his ambition, where his fiancée can document their life without being dismissed as superficial. Most importantly, it's a place where I learned that the most authentic thing you can do is be honest about who you are, even when that person is more successful, more accomplished, more capable than the people around you expect you to be. 2 years later, I stood in the same Logan Square apartment that Marcus had once dismissed as evidence of my failure. But everything had changed. The space looked exactly the same, with its carefully curated vintage furniture and walls lined with architecture books. But the story it told was completely different. This wasn't the home of someone who couldn't afford better. This was the home of someone who had chosen authenticity over ostentation, substance over status. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Marcus and Lisa standing in the hallway, but they weren't the same people who had visited 2 years ago. Marcus carried himself with a confidence that came from genuine achievement rather than borrowed status symbols. Lisa's smile was warmer, more genuine, less calculated for an invisible audience. They'd both grown into versions of themselves that I recognized and respected. "Emma," Marcus said, embracing me with the kind of hug that spoke of real affection rather than obligation. "The place looks exactly the same. That's because it is exactly the same," I said, leading them inside. "I still love it here." Lisa looked around the apartment with new eyes, taking in details she'd missed during her previous visits. "You know, I never really appreciated this before, but there's something really special about this space. It feels like home in a way that our Harrison Tower apartment never quite did." "Really?" I asked, genuinely curious about her change in perspective. "Don't get me wrong, I love our apartment," Lisa said, settling onto the couch that she'd once dismissed as thrift store furniture. "But it's designed to impress people, to photograph well, to make a statement about who we are. This place is designed for living, for being comfortable, for actually enjoying your space." Marcus nodded, walking over to the window that overlooked the tree-lined street below. "I used to think this neighborhood was holding you back, that you were settling for less than you deserved. Now I realize you were choosing something most people never find." "What's that?" "Contentment," Marcus said simply. "You were content with your choices, with your life, with who you were. I was so busy chasing external validation that I couldn't recognize internal peace when I saw it." The conversation was interrupted by my phone, buzzing with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled, recognizing the number of Maria Santos, one of the first recipients of the Rivera Development Group's affordable housing program that Marcus had helped design. "Emma, I just wanted to thank you again for the opportunity. 6 months in my new apartment, and I'm finally able to save money for my daughter's college fund. You changed our lives." I showed the message to Marcus, who read it with obvious pride. The affordable housing program had become his passion project, the way he'd chosen to use his success to create opportunities for other people. In the past 2 years, the program had helped over 300 families access quality housing they could actually afford. "How many families are we up to now?" I asked. 312, Marcus said without hesitation. "And we're expanding to 2 more neighborhoods next year." Lisa's been documenting the program on her social media, and the response has been incredible. We're getting inquiries from other cities about replicating the model. I looked at Lisa. remembering how I'd initially dismissed her social media presence as superficial. Her Instagram account had evolved into a powerful platform for social change, showcasing the stories of families who'd benefited from the program, highlighting small businesses in gentrifying neighborhoods, and demonstrating how influence could be used for positive impact. "You know what the best part is?" Lisa said, scrolling through her recent posts. "The engagement is so much higher on content that actually matters. People are hungry for authenticity, for stories that inspire them to make a difference rather than just consume more stuff." "That's because you're giving them something real," I said. "Something that connects to their values rather than their insecurities." Marcus walked over to my bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of urban planning texts and architectural theory books. "Emma, I have to ask you something. Do you ever regret not telling us about your success sooner? Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if you'd been honest from the beginning?" I considered the question, thinking about all the assumptions and misunderstandings that had shaped our relationship for so many years. "I regret the pain it caused you," I said finally. "I regret letting you feel rejected and confused when a simple conversation could have prevented all of that. But I don't regret the journey we took to get here." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if I'd told you about Rivera Development Group 5 years ago, you might have seen me differently, but you wouldn't have grown in the ways you needed to grow. You wouldn't have questioned your own assumptions about success, about community, about what it means to build something meaningful." Lisa looked up from her phone. "You're saying that the struggle was necessary?" "I'm saying that the struggle was authentic," I said. "You both had to figure out what you really valued, what you really wanted to build with your lives. If I'd given you easy answers, you might never have asked the hard questions." Marcus nodded slowly. "Like whether I was pursuing success for its own sake, or because I wanted to make a difference." "Exactly. And Lisa had to figure out whether she wanted to be an influencer because it was easy, or because she could use that platform to influence positive change." "But what about you?" Marcus asked. "What did you have to figure out?" I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built and the choices I'd made. I had to figure out whether I was hiding my success because I was humble or because I was afraid. I had to learn the difference between authenticity and invisibility. And what did you learn? I learned that authenticity isn't about downplaying your achievements or pretending to be less than you are. It's about being honest about who you are and what you've accomplished, while also being honest about your failures and your fears. The conversation was interrupted by another text message, this one from our mother. "Mija, I'm so proud of all 3 of you. Marcus sent me the article about the affordable housing program. I never imagined my children would grow up to change so many lives." I smiled, remembering the conversation I'd had with my parents 2 years ago, when I'd finally told them about Rivera Development Group. They'd been shocked, of course, but also proud in a way that went beyond simple parental satisfaction. They had understood that their daughter had built something meaningful, something that reflected the values they'd tried to instill in both of us. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said, reading the text over my shoulder. "Mom and Dad are more proud of the affordable housing program than they are of the Harrison Tower. They're more impressed by the fact that we're helping working-class families than by the fact that you own a 42-story building." "That's because they understand what really matters," I said. "They understand that success isn't about what you accumulate, but about what you contribute." Lisa put her phone away and looked at both of us seriously. "Can I tell you something?" When I first started dating Marcus, I was intimidated by his family. "You all seemed so grounded, so authentic, so connected to something bigger than yourselves." I felt like I was too shallow, too focused on surface things. "What changed?" I asked. "I realized that authenticity isn't something you're born with," Lisa said. "It's something you choose, again and again, in small moments and big decisions. I realized that I could choose to use my platform for something meaningful, that I could choose to be part of something bigger than myself." Marcus reached over and took her hand, and I realized that I could choose to measure my success by the impact I had on other people's lives, not by the apartment I lived in or the car I drove. "So what happens now?" I asked. "What's next for the Rodriguez family empire?" Marcus laughed. "Emma, I love that you call it an empire. But it's not really an empire, is it? It's more like a network of people who are trying to make their communities better. That's the best kind of empire, I said. The kind that empowers other people, instead of just concentrating power. Lisa pulled out her phone again, but this time, it was to show us something, rather than to check her messages. Actually, I've been working on something that I wanted to share with both of you. It's a documentary series about the affordable housing program, but it's also about family, about authenticity, about what it means to build something meaningful together. The video she showed us was beautiful, weaving together interviews with program participants, behind-the-scenes footage of construction sites, and intimate conversations between family members. It told the story of how a real estate developer, a marketing executive, and a social media influencer had found ways to use their different skills and platforms to create positive change. Lisa, this is incredible, I said, genuinely moved by what I was seeing. You've managed to tell a story that's both personal and universal, both specific to our family and relevant to everyone who's trying to figure out how to make a difference. The best part is the ending, Marcus said, obviously proud of his fiancée's work. Show her the last scene. Lisa scrolled to the end of the video, where I appeared on screen sitting in my Logan Square apartment, surrounded by the same books and furniture and carefully chosen possessions that had always reflected my values. But now the space was contextualized differently, presented not as evidence of limitation, but as evidence of choice. Success isn't about having the biggest apartment or the most expensive car, my recorded voice said. It's about building a life that reflects your values, that contributes to something bigger than yourself, that allows you to be proud of who you are and what you've accomplished. The video ended with a wide shot of the Chicago skyline, showing both the Harrison Tower and the neighborhoods where the affordable housing program had created opportunities for working families. It was a visual representation of how different approaches to success could coexist and complement each other. When will this be released? I asked. Next month, Lisa said. We're premiering it at the Chicago Film Festival, and then it'll be available on streaming platforms. The goal is to inspire other families, other communities, to think about how they can use their resources and talents to create positive change. Marcus stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the street where children were playing on the sidewalk and neighbors were chatting in front of local businesses. You know what I love about this neighborhood? He said. It's not trying to be anything other than what it is. It's not trying to impress anyone or prove anything. It's just authentic. That's what I've always loved about it, I said. It's a place where people can be themselves without apology. And that's what I've learned from you, Marcus said, turning back to face me. That authenticity isn't about hiding your success or downplaying your achievements. It's about being honest about who you are and what you believe in, regardless of what other people might think. Lisa nodded. And it's about using whatever platform you have, whatever resources you have, whatever talents you have, to make the world a little bit better. As they prepared to leave, Marcus paused at the door. Emma, I have one more confession to make. What's that? I used to think you were wasting your potential by living in this apartment, by choosing this lifestyle. But now I realize you were showing me what it looks like to be successful on your own terms, to build a life that reflects your values rather than other people's expectations. And now? Now I realize that this apartment isn't small, Marcus said, looking around the space one more time. It's exactly the right size for the life you've chosen to build. After they left, I sat in my apartment as the sun set over Logan Square, painting the walls in warm golden light. The space felt peaceful, purposeful, exactly right for who I was and what I'd chosen to build with my life. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day. This one from a young woman named Sarah Chen who had just been accepted into the affordable housing program. Ms. Rodriguez, I just wanted to thank you for believing in people like me. I'm starting my master's program in social work next month, and having affordable housing means I can focus on my studies instead of working 3 jobs to pay rent. Someday, I hope to create programs that help other people the way you've helped me. I smiled, understanding that this was what success actually looked like. Not the building I owned or the company I'd built, but the ripple effects of choices made with intention and care. Sarah would become a social worker who helped vulnerable families. Maria would save money for her daughter's college education. 312 families would have stable housing and the opportunity to build better lives. The Harrison Tower would always be there, a testament to what was possible when you combined vision with resources. But the affordable housing program would be my real legacy, the proof that success was most meaningful when it was shared. I opened my laptop and began typing a new blog post for the Rivera Development Group website, something I'd been thinking about for weeks. It was titled, "The Authenticity of Ambition: Why Hiding Your Success Doesn't Make You Humble." In it, I wrote about the difference between humility and invisibility, about the responsibility that comes with success, about the importance of being honest about your achievements while also being honest about your failures. I wrote about the danger of judging other people's ambitions, about the value of different approaches to success, about the possibility of building communities that celebrated achievement while also supporting those who were still working toward their goals. But mostly I wrote about family, about the ways that love and misunderstanding could coexist, about the possibility of building authentic relationships based on honesty rather than assumption. As I finished writing, I looked around my apartment one more time. Tomorrow, I would wake up in the same space that Marcus had once dismissed as evidence of my failure. But the story it told was completely different now. This wasn't the home of someone who couldn't afford better. This was the home of someone who had chosen authenticity over ostentation, substance over status, community over isolation. And for the first time in years, I was completely proud of that choice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.